Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 43rd episode of the Truth Island podcast. I am joined once again with Dallas, and the last time we spoke, we mentioned a scenario in which a wife leaves her dying husband. While many people might jump and judge this as a callous move, there might have been a lot of unknown variables and factors that may have led to her decision. Perhaps that wife found out that she had been completely cut out of her husband's will after 15 years of dedicated marriage. Perhaps some other deathbed skeletons emerged that she had been unaware of. It could also be that the situation at hand was simply too dire, and she was perhaps incapable of dealing with the stark reality that lurked before her. There are many rules that govern when and when it is not acceptable to leave others, with some feeling that marriage is a sacred pact that ends in death do us part, while a modern interpretation might allow for considerable changes in character and circumstances of being a determiner of whether we have to stick around for the funeral. For example, what exactly is it that ties us to other people? Are we chained to our families, friends that have been there for us in the past? Must we always love that son or daughter who fails us time and time and time again? When exactly does our free will to move on with our lives kick in from our obligation to help those who need us most? Basically, the question I want to present to you, Dallas, is it ever okay to abandon people?
That was a mouthful.
Yes,
that
yes, yes.
was a lot to take in, and it was very yeah, brought so much to life for me from experience. And you starting off talking about marriage and this woman and the various scenarios that she might discover that might lead her to abandon him, as you put it, and kind of brought me back to, and it's always good to speak from one's own experience, to my own marriage, where I was with my ex-wife for 17 years.
Wow.
And yeah, and we were living together, and I'd say extremely content and happy for the first 10, let's call it. And then the last 7 was a period of time where we slowly started to chip away at each other in negative ways, and a darkness pervaded the marriage to the point where it was doing neither of us any good to stay in it, and we eventually ended it. I chose to walk away first, and then she eventually agreed that was the best thing to do. But it was a very critical point of time in my life. I was in my 40s, and am I going to go on the next 20, 30 years till death do us part? Or am I going to make a change? And I chose to make that change. And I told her at the time, you're going to find somebody who's going to be able to meet your needs and give you everything that you're looking for that I'm not providing for you, because I was admittedly honest about that, that I wasn't capable of doing that at the time. And she didn't like that. Understandably, that doesn't, go over too well when you're with somebody for 17 years. But I'll just tell you quickly, she eventually met a man, moved in with that man, and then got married to him, and she's living very happy and contented today. So I want to say I was a little prophetic there.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I definitely have some questions. Would you say that radically changed after the 10th year of marriage, or was this something that was kind of like creeping up on the horizon?
yeah, it was very specific to our attempts to have a child.
Okay.
She got pregnant together. We were planning for a family, and she unfortunately had a miscarriage that was very traumatic to the both of us, but particularly for her. And that started in motion several years of trying to have, get subsequently pregnant again,
Mm,
and having another failed attempt, miscarriage. and it just started to, like I said, bring this darkness in the marriage that neither of us could really figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that seems like a very rough thing. Given those circumstances, did you at all feel guilt in the situation, or how did you feel? Because I'm wondering, like,
Yes. Yeah, because it's something where the dynamic in our marriage was that she was 7 years older. So biologically, she was in her early 40s. And as you probably know, it becomes hard for a woman to produce eggs at that point in time and to carry a child to
yeah,
term. So I felt extremely guilty that I was making this effort to have a baby, placing any blame on her for where she was biologically in her life. She had no control over how old she was and things of that nature having to do with herself biologically. So I did carry guilt about placing blame on her, if that makes any sense.
now, it just to be fair to you, it wasn't necessarily that, you couldn't have kids that made you leave. It was just the darkness of the marriage at that point that made you just decide you had enough.
Yeah, because what happened for me was I had a crisis of faith, of belief in something that was taking care of us. To put it simply, if God was going to allow, this to happen to us, that's just how I perceived it at that time, then there really was no meaning in life. And that made me kind of take it out on her, which was not necessarily the right thing to do, but I'm human.
Sure.
And for her as well, she was actually more of a religious person who completely lost faith in her own God at that time, and so she was striking out at me in ways that kind of alienated me, and so we were each taking it out upon the other, and it was unfortunate, right? Because neither of us was at fault.
It's easy, like when we leave or vacate a marriage or some kind of sustained relationship, if the other party is clearly at fault, like let's just say you found her with another man, then there's no guilt involved in this situation. It's just like, okay, you were with another man, I have every right to kind of vacate this situation and leave. But this is like an example where there's a gloomy circumstance and that's creating gloom. I want to kind of think of it this way, because would you say that in some ways, Dallas, you are committing maybe a merciful act both upon yourself and on your wife?
Yeah, yeah, it definitely was a form of mercy, as you put it, because it allowed, in the short term, it felt like a death, as it would for any couple that's been together for that long a duration. 17 years.
Yeah, man,
There's a
no.
you're basically joined at the hip at that point,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
almost physically and metaphorically, obviously. But so there's a death feeling that just occurs no matter what. But like I said, honestly, it took about a year and a half for me to personally kind of fully recover and restabilize in my own life. But it was an act of mercy because it was something where if we had gone on and tried to sustain something that was unsustainable, misery was in store for us for the next 5, 10, however long we might have like tried to push it.
Yes. I think that's really important for our listeners to hear, because typically when we think of one person leaving another, we think of that person like jumping into a convertible and driving off to Disney World and just having lots and lots and lots of fun. But they also don't consider that that person is also doing something that's incredibly difficult for themselves, right? Because like when you initially left your wife for that first year, I'm sure you were still in a really dark place, right? Like you didn't jump in a convertible and travel the world and have fun. Like
Yes, yes, it was a period of kind of in some ways feeling like I was in the wilderness because I had to just reinvent myself, and in some ways that's a beautiful process, right? To rediscover yourself in a new way. But it's also for me, it didn't come without a tremendous amount of pain and loss and grief. And I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, but I had an incredible bout of insomnia. And I don't know if any of our listeners or you has ever dealt with insomnia, where each of us has probably encountered that at one point in time. But for me, it lasted for, like I said, a year and a half. It was a very difficult period of time.
This decision had a toll on your sleep, and it definitely took like an emotional toll. This
Yeah.
is something that one other question I want to ask you, and this is a question that I was talking to someone else about, is this idea of cold turkey. So when you first left your wife, were you cold turkey from her, or were you still texting or an occasional phone call just to see how each other were doing?
The marriage ended by a process of me staying in the apartment. She stayed in the bedroom, and I slept on the couch, and that lasted for about a month or two. So that was actually a blessing in disguise,
Hmm.
because even though we were physically separated, obviously we would see each other from time to time, and we knew the marriage was ending. It was a lot better than if, like you just described, cold turkey, never speaking to that person again. But when I actually physically went to another apartment, it did feel like a sense of withdrawal, right? Like this
Hmm.
person is no longer there, and you from time to time, have inclinations to contact that person. I think that's just human nature. Fortunately, I was in a place where I wanted to, like I said, reinvent myself, and I took it upon myself to surround myself with people that were, supportive in that environment, friends, and I want to say family, but family actually, if I were real honest, was kind of an antagonistic force at that time. They were very upset that I was leaving the marriage. They had formed a bond with my ex-wife, and they were looking to see that I preserved that relationship. So they felt betrayed on some level, which is something that you and I both spoke about. Family can be a very tough road to navigate.
That's a very interesting dynamic, because you're on one hand making one of the most difficult choices of your life, and leaving someone you love dearly, and now your family is leaving you, and then they're in a sense kind of abandoning you, and we can sort of debate whether that's justified or unjustified, but it's kind of just making the pain for you that much worse. And I think the difference is that in the case of your family, it's like you're not actively making their life miserable, right? Like you see maybe your family once a week, once every other week, depending on if they live in the same state as you. So that's not
Mm.
like the same rules of marriage where you kind of have to deal with this person on a daily basis. I want to also touch upon this, like living together for 2 months after the marriage ended, because I
Yeah,
think that a lot of people, when they initially break up, there seems to be this habit of still having, like, still seeing each other, still talking to one another. And I
right.
feel like people can't process like the hurt until it's 100% like you rip the band-aid off. I feel like if you're in that purgatory limbo state, you
Right.
aren't really healing. You aren't going, you one, aren't feeling the full brunt of the pain of the separation, and two,
Right.
you're sort of delaying the healing process.
Yeah, yeah, I would tend to agree with that. It doesn't allow for the growth, that you need if you're trying to claw and scratch and grab and hold on to that relationship that's either dead or in the process of dying. And we took a walk one day, my ex-wife and I, to the West Side Highway. We were living in Manhattan, and there's, obviously the park area that's runs along the river there in the Hudson River. And we sat in the grass, and we looked at one another, and we basically, at that moment, she kind of said to me, kind of like, now I'm ready to really say goodbye.
Hmm.
And that was a profound moment for both of us because we were able to do that in a way where we both had great esteem for one another, and yet it was from that moment on we had to rip the band-aid off, and that was a very pivotal moment.
I love your wife's words, and I feel like that I think when these breakups happen, it's really important to go with it with a caring and loving word, or something that shows like, I'm hurt by what you did, or I'm hurt about this situation, but I don't hate you. And I think that's a very important. I think it's really important to get that right. And that's I think that hiding behind like a text message breakup, or Facebook, or I think that I really think that, especially when you've invested years into something, you have to go into a public space, or you have to go into there has to be, and I think that's like I've been along the West Side Highway River all the time. That's a perfect place because it's out in the public, but you probably found like a patch of grass that was just you and her, and no one was really listening to what was going on. And that's important. I think you owe it to that person to give them 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever it is that it takes to make a clean break from it. Let's fast forward. You have this year that's extremely rough. Do you think that after a year of separation, maybe 2 years of separation, what do you think is the right amount of time of separation where you can then not get back into that other person's life, but you can sort of take like a little sneak peek and be like, oh, great, glad that you're doing okay? Or is that something that maybe should be avoided altogether?
Yeah, I think I'm in favor of finding that right moment in time to send an email or a text or a call and leave a message. Happened for us. I mean, she would stay in touch periodically, and then it was not too long after for her, she was found this man that she's married to today. That was actually helpful because it wasn't the idea of, oh, we're getting back in touch with one another in the hopes that we might get back together again. It was just more out of support and friendship and acknowledgement for all the years of being really extreme friends with one another. We really valued each other and still do today.
I think that maybe it's not. I like what you're saying here. That maybe it's not so much like I have to wait 2 years or something, but maybe you should just wait until you have a general. Maybe through the grapevine, you find out. Okay, I'm in a really strong place right now, and she's in a really strong place right now. I think
Right.
we can make this work, and maybe that could be 2 years, or it could also be 5 years, or it could be never. And I think that's also a part of the equation.
Yeah, and really quick, I would want to speak about my father was very ill. He ended up passing away about 5 years ago,
Mm.
and he lived a long and happy life. So I want to put that out there. He was 87 years old and was an actor for many years in theater and film and TV, and everything I have in me as an artist, came from him and his spirit. And so it was a beautiful thing actually honor his life at the end. And what happened was my ex-wife came to the funeral service that we held for my father in an old theater, a Shakespearean theater, and it was a wonderful way to. I think it was like the first time I saw her since that day we parted on the West Side Highway, or we'd only seen each other a couple times since then. But she came to that service for my father with her husband, and I thought that was a very powerful show of support that she gave to me because I really appreciated it, and she was really close to my father, extremely close. But that she came with her husband was also signal of like, again, that this is friendship and this is support, and not about, is there going to be some kind of way of us resurrecting our romance with one another.
And it's also
Yeah.
important that it's also not a game of one-upsmanship. Like, oh, I have this much better man, or I have this much better wife in my life. It's really you both, and this is like a really difficult balance to make, where you're showing up with another partner, but it's out of mutual respect for one another that this is happening. It's not out of like, I managed to grab this guy who's 1,000 times better than you, sort of back and forth. I'm happy, you're happy, I'm happy for all of us.
Happy for all of us. I mean, the only thing I'll say is when I first met her ex, I'm sorry, when I first met her new husband, I'm the ex. Uh, she she gave me his name, and I won't say his name, but I was expecting to meet somebody who was not who I ended up meeting. Let's just put it this way: he kind of reminded me of a younger Richard Gere. So I was a little bit, taken aback that she married someone so handsome. It was an upgrade.
But at the same time, it could make you feel better. Like, look at you. You look where you've gone in the world, right? So I think
Yes,
that that can help like get rid of any last traces of guilt. Like you're in a much better place right now.
yes, yeah, and I just absolutely want to emphatically say that she's so much in a happier and in a better place. And for me, I've gone on to do amazing things with my life that I really attribute to making that decision. That was back in 2010, so it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, time has that magical way, right? I think that was a beautiful and inspirational story. And if there's people out there who are wondering if they should get a divorce or something, I think this can really help them because I think that seeing this as a merciful act is a very beautiful kind of way to sort of frame this issue. I want
Mhm.
to kind of turn down a dark tunnel a little bit here.
Mm.
And going back to our scenario with the wife and the husband in the hospital, what about in the cases of terminal illnesses or something or something that, because I think in your wife's case, it wasn't the forces of nature that drove you apart. It was her disposition. Like she had at the time a very negative disposition or dark
Right.
disposition. So I'm wondering in the cases when there's like an unforeseen circumstances that changes things, or how much are you obligated to kind of stay?
Yeah, I really think that it does, in my opinion, it varies from circumstance to circumstance. So that is a place where it really gets into the details of your particular relationship with that person. I haven't had someone who's terminally ill who I've had to,
Yeah,
let's just put it bluntly, like turn my back on. I haven't had that scenario, but I will say this. My mother was married to my father, obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But no, they were together, and when I tell you that they were two of the most polar opposite people, that statement couldn't be more true. They loved each other and got married, and by the time I was 8 years old, they were divorced, and it was a bitter divorce. And throughout the rest of the time that we were growing up, my brother and myself, they fought and would argue from afar because he lived in a different house by that point, still in the same town. And when it came time to my father passing away, that I described to you earlier, 5 years ago, my mother would not go to the hospital to visit him
Hmm.
before he passed away. And that what you were touching on reminded me of that circumstance and how her bitterness and her resentment, I'm talking 30, 40 years old,
Sure.
this resentment that she held on to was enough to keep her away from his bedside in the just to say goodbye to somebody that you made two kids with. And so I didn't understand it at the time, and I still have a hard time understanding it now, but that was her position.
I like the point that you're mentioning here, and in service to your mother, I think that she did express her, distaste for the marriage early on, and they did get a divorce. So, it was kind of known, it was out there. Even when your father was in good health, it was known, like, I have a problem with this man. And then when she decided not to come to the hospital and visit him, they already had separated for a number of years. So I think like you're onto something there. I think that with that case, with the scenario that we described earlier with the wife and the husband, I think if that wife had said, I've really fallen out of love with this man 5 years before he ended up in the hospital, or 6 years, or, even even just while he was healthy, and then she decided to separate, people would be like, okay, totally cool. You owe nothing to this man because he's not treating you right, or you don't love him anymore, blah, blah, blah. I think when you're married to somebody and they fall under distress and you haven't vocalized, like, it just, people point to it and say, gee whiz, it's awfully convenient for you now to kind of want to back out of this thing.
Yeah, I really see what you're saying now. When it's a scenario where the leaving of the person happens to be out of the blue and blindsided, it can really be seen as distasteful, right?
Right, yes.
Because there has been no prior communication to that point that there was any upset or problems, or to the extent where you wanted to leave that person. And if that is not voiced until the time that the person, let's say, is diagnosed with cancer or whatever, disease it might be, that can be a very kind of troubling circumstance.
All of these situations are very situational, right? But it's so hard to imagine that, like, the second somebody is diagnosed with something, that's the moment you realize that they were a jerk all along. I think that's just a very hard leap of faith to make for most people, but it's something that is floating out there, and I don't really have a clear answer to it. I want to also tackle this issue with the terminal illness. Let's just say everything is really wonderful in this marriage, and there is no, like, secret resentment or secret will, or, mistress on the side kind of situation, and these two people truly love each other. However, the nature of this illness lasts for like 5, 10, 15, it's a I forget that Stephen King novel where the guy goes into a coma for like 5 or 6 years, and then he wakes up and his wife is gone and remarried. I think it was Deadpool, maybe. I forgot the name of it. But anyways, so I'm thinking in my head, is there also like a time limit that one spouse owes the other in an event where they're incapacitated, or, in some kind of vegetative state? I'm wondering if that is at all acceptable.
Yeah, I just think it's up to the individual circumstance and person, and how you feel connected to that individual. I remember when I'd left my marriage, and I was in a new apartment, and I was talking to a woman that I felt incredible feelings for, and she's half a world away. She's in Cannes, right in France, and I was telling her about the insomnia that I was experiencing after leaving my wife, and she said, and I said something about not having that body next to me. I can't sleep.
Hmm.
And she said, it's not a body, it's a soul. And regardless of whether you believe we have souls or not, I understood in that moment what she was saying. She's like, you're not just with the physical person, you're with them on some metaphysical journey. So for some people, that's a very, very strong and intense relationship that runs deep. And for other people, maybe not so much. And or there's a limit to it, as you said. And I'm not here to place judgment at all, but everybody has to kind of find within themselves where that boundary is.
Hmm. I think I mean, God bless that woman. That is really, really deep. Like, yeah, I mean, wow, this idea that we are attached to the soul and not necessarily the body. And I think I think that's something like, when I was younger, Dallas, that's something I didn't understand at all. Like, because I think especially when we're young, we're extremely vain creatures, right? Like we are very, like, we want to make sure that we look good in jeans or whatever it is and make sure our partner is. But I think as you get older, you really start looking at a person's soul, and hence the word soul mate. So
Oh, there you go.
yeah, right. And I think that if you are judging that relationship by how intertwined your souls are, then the corporeal, or the body isn't playing such a difference. Now, look, it's easy for me to I haven't been in that situation either, Dallas. So it's easy for me to just be like, yep, if our souls were aligned, I would just do it. I don't, it's this is not a question that I can answer right now, and hopefully I will never have to answer that question. But that rationality can allow every marriage to survive, but I think it might make you fight a little harder if you're really looking at it in terms of, is my soul still aligned with this woman or with this man? Then it's going to make you kind of stay in the game a bit longer, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that was really important for you to say because we're human beings living in a vast universe and we come across relationships. Some last for, and they touch us deeply, but how often does that really come along?
Yeah.
And when it does, as you grow older, as I grow older, I'm over 50, let's put it this way.
you look
I'm not
you look
60,
very
but I'm
young,
not
my
50.
friend. Like,
Oh,
you
okay.
look I know people
And
can't see you, but
yeah,
I'm looking at you.
right. All right. And I'll take it. But you get older and you realize that, yeah, your opportunities to, whether it's that soulmate or whether it's a friendship or, that family member who, am I going to make amends here, with this person or try to salvage that relationship because there aren't really that many more years left when you think about it. And I have a brother and we're on good terms and he has a family and I love my nieces and nephews and his wife, but it's not the easiest relationship where we get along like gangbusters. I have to work at it and there's still some things that stand in the way of us being closer than maybe we could if I made an effort or if he made an effort.
Yes, yes. And I want to touch upon one last thing before we change topic. Do you think that if that person who's terminally ill is still conscious, do you think there's also some responsibility on them to gauge the happiness of their partner and say, listen, I'm not getting out of this bed. You go on, you go live a life, you go start a family, you go do what you need to do. Do you think that that's also a part of the love equation where the person that's, lying in that bed, if they are conscious and in the right state of mind, they also have a responsibility to kind of see if their loved one is happy or suffering?
I do. I really do. And I would hope that if I were in that position, terminally ill, let's say, or in and out of a consciousness, and I could say to my wife or loved one, just go, be happy, find love in your life. I hope that I would do that. You see in movies, right, where that you see that scenario play out and the person who's there on the other end doesn't want to give up their their soulmate who they're so attached to. And in my scenario, in the movie that I fashioned in my own head, I would make sure that that person pays heed to that and goes to live a beautiful happy existence because really the guilt that we carry is in our own hearts, right? At the end of the day, we place more guilt than maybe there should be placed upon us to begin with.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think in the ideal soulmate, pairing, I think that the person in the bed should be like, no, you go off, you go have fun. And then the person taking care of that person's like, no, 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 I'm going to stay. I want to be here. I want to be here. And I think if you had that kind of like interplay,
Yeah.
then that is like the most bedrock solid foundation
Yeah.
of a marriage or a relationship. Who
That's
knows how
right.
many of us could even like live up to that, but like
Right.
that's like iconic like religious imagery up there in the clouds for us to all gaze upon, and who knows how many
I
of us
like it.
could actually stomach this. Okay,
I love it.
moving on. Let's just think a little bit about family and our obligations. Do you think that family in general has they should be afforded more allowances, like just by virtue of us having the same blood? I automatically afford you more allowances before I abandon you or leave you.
Yeah, I do think there's obviously, for me, there's obviously more of a reason to try to make things work with family than not, because of the tie of not only blood but all the time that you spent developing who you are as a person can be attributed to the family for better and for worse. Because we always pick up very the positive traits of our caretakers and siblings, and in some cases, unfortunately, the negative ones too, right?
Yeah.
Can travel with us, and we're always trying to emphasize and maximize the positive ones and reduce the negative ones. But when it comes to family and trying to be that person that cares and shows empathy and compassion, I think it's an important thing to do. I know that I've been on the receiving end of it and the giving end of it with my family, but it has come at times not so easily.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that yes, with family you do have to have a much longer rope. I hear you on this, you know. I think though that it's important to have like lines in the sand, and I think that
Mm.
this is real. Like you can have like, yes, if you're family you have that longer rope, that longer of like you do get to get away with more things than your average bear out there, you know, that you just met in Manhattan or something. Right, like, but
Yeah.
I think it's important because family can take you for granted if you don't have any lines in the sand. And I think that once they see, oh, wait a minute, there are points of no return, that can actually kind of strengthen those familiar, you know, those family ties.
Yeah, that is something that I've experienced time and again with my mother and my stepfather and my brother, who really, now are the people that are left, so to speak, that I grew up with. There's this place of feeling at times great guilt for not having done more or been a better son or a better brother. And then there's times where I feel like the lines in the sand need to be drawn
Mm.
to retain integrity and to communicate that I will not be taken advantage of, and I will not, whether it's belittled or shamed or any of these kind of negative emotional attachments that can be try to be placed on you.
I love that word that you just used, integrity. The integrity of the relationship is at stake. And I think that sometimes I think that the only reason that your friends respect you is because they know there is a line in the sand, and they know that if they push too far, you're gonna, oh, screw you, buddy, I'm done with you. I'm not picking up the phone when you call anymore. They know that, and that actually creates integrity in those relationships. It creates integrity that your friends know that if I borrow $800 from Dallas and don't pay him back, that there's no integrity in that relationship anymore. Dallas is gone. And I think having that integrity with family is super important. And actually it'll make these family relationships richer because now they respect you and you respect them. Because on the receiving end of this, if somebody's constantly taking advantage, even if they're family, you're losing respect for them as a basic human being.
Wow. Yeah, the integrity is the watchword, and respect that comes from that. There's no better gauge for a relationship that I've found. I'm experiencing it right now, or I should say, on Tuesday it was my brother and my mother's birthday, so it was really exciting. The whole range of family got on a Zoom call. So we had my mother and my stepfather in Florida, my brother in Montclair, New Jersey, and myself here in Brooklyn with my girlfriend. And it was actually the first time my girlfriend was meeting my mother and my stepdad was via this Zoom call. So it's funny how a birthday Zoom call, it's incredible what technology can do for us these days. And it was all about mutual respect and admiration for one another. And it really felt like a very profound experience, even if it was just to say hi, happy birthday. Everybody came away feeling great.
I love that. I love that because I think that when we, when we think of these things, oh my God, you abandoned your sister. How could you? You're a monster. But then people don't see the positive of like, because I was really hard on my sister, now we can come together on Zoom or come together at Thanksgiving and really love and have respect. And what that means is that yes, my sister or whoever has to kind of bite their tongue a little bit and not be as so cavalier and as free in the way they talk or they respect me. But that's going to create like more love at that Thanksgiving dinner table because when you come to Thanksgiving, I think this is what happens is that when you come to Thanksgiving, everyone thinks they're entitled to be at that table. Everyone thinks, well, like I am your uncle, I or whatever. I'm entitled to sit here and I can spew whatever garbage it is that I want to, and nobody can do anything. Whereas you would never in a million years do that at a friend's Thanksgiving dinner. If you were at a friend's Thanksgiving dinner, you would be, oh yeah, 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 that turkey was delicious. Thank you, thank you. Oh, so nice to be here. You would keep it on the down low, but I think that because it's family, you take for granted family.
You really do. And just as a way of defining how important that birthday call was on Tuesday, flashback years ago, I was in a family therapy session where it did not go well. Let's just put it that way, without going into detail. Nobody got hurt. No fisticuffs.
Yeah.
There was a thrown umbrella, but
Okay.
you
Umbrellas
know,
are cheap,
no, yeah, but it wasn't a chair or anything like that, and it divided the family for at least 6 months to a year. It was a really bad fight, altercation. And then so now to flash forward and to have this birthday call that we had, and because the kind of line in the sand was drawn that day, as much as it was painful, it was a line in the sand that needed to be drawn,
Yes.
and it allowed eventually for that family relationship and dynamic to kind of reset itself.
Yes, yes, yes. And like with any labor, you'll always see the fruits. And I think that's like a way
Oh,
of I think that's a way of thinking about it. Very last topic that we're going to hit upon.
yeah.
And this is this idea of, I guess, investment or capital, I guess, and this perhaps applies more in the realm of friendships. Okay, so let's say you've had a friend for many years, and this has been a really, 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 really good friend. They got you a job when you didn't have a job. Bro, come sleep on my couch. I got you, man. Whatever. Here's $1,000. Go get your life back in order, right? You've got this really awesome friend. He's been there for a number of years. And then he goes through a really dark patch and becomes a nastier person. Does his like previous service record entitle him to like a greater tolerance in your life, or do you have to just make these decisions in the moment of like, no, you've been a jerk for a month now and like I'm done with you, like that what you did, or do we have some onus to kind of look at your service record?
Probably the latter category, take into account the positives that this person positive qualities, traits, behaviors, actions that they might have shown in the past, and not necessarily disown them for the one action. Obviously, it's different as to the gravity of that action.
Yeah, right.
If they steal, $20 from you, that's one thing. If they kill someone, you've got to report it to the police.
Yes, of course.
So, that's always something to consider. But on the whole, I think you do take into account the service record, as you put it. I've had friends, and I'm involved with something that has been very positive and beneficial in my life, and it really turned my life around, actually, to take this action for myself. And I come across people all the time that have a history of problems and past actions that were very negative and damaging, and yet they sit before me and they're changed people. They're incredibly responsible and accountable and giving great joy to the world. So it can be that case that you're describing in reverse, that somebody in the past was very questionable behavior, and then now look at them, they're doing great things. So if you had judged them in the past based on what they did there alone, you might have discredited all the good that they were going to bring into the world, if that makes any sense.
I guess if someone who I did not know was being nasty to me in the present, I wouldn't give him a chance. Like that's just, I'm a New Yorker. I'm pretty callous. I'm pretty jaded. I'm like, yeah, you seem like a strange fellow, but away with you. But here's what I think happens with the good service record friends, is that because they were so awesome to you at some previous juncture, you have that hope that it's like, okay, they're going to turn it around now. They're going to turn it around. They're going to be like their old self again. Because I think what happens is that they create like an image in your mind of what they could be because they once were that thing. And then that makes you more hopeful that they will eventually turn it around and become, what they were like before or even better.
Correct. Yeah. I think that's so accurate with the hope, right?
Yeah.
That they would maybe return to form, to their former positive selves. Now, if that same person repeats the same action, or something where it's ongoing behavior, and they're just going south really quick, then it's time to kind of cut ties with that person, I'd say. But I think you give them the benefit of the doubt initially, to try to turn things around.
Yeah, as much as possible. And I actually I did touch upon this in a previous podcast about separation, at the very, like, if they're a good friend and they have the service record, and they are acting really nasty, it might just be wise. Like, imagine there's a tornado going through Kansas. That doesn't mean I'm never going to return to Kansas. It just means I probably don't want to be in Kansas while that tornado is going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have friends that are very dear to me, and one person I'm thinking of in particular right now. And it's just, he's been an incredible inspiration for me, and caused me to have extreme growth in the last several months.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I just have nothing to say but positive things for this person. And if I thought for a moment in your scenario where he maybe crossed me or did something damaging, I would I wouldn't be able to just turn my back on him, because of
Right.
everything that he supplied me with has been so enriching. And I would just give him that second chance opportunity to right the wrong.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also, I think that I was also speaking to this other gentleman who was like in New York. We're really big on this idea of loyalty, right? Like this is a
Yeah.
huge, it's a huge like thing of loyalty. And like on one hand, I'm like, yes, 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 loyalty is important, but at the same time, there are again, like we go back to the lines in the sand, where you have now crossed a boundary where I no longer owe you any loyalty, no matter what you did for me in the past. Maybe you gave me a job, maybe you picked me off the street when I was whatever. Like, no matter how much you've done for me in the past, I no longer owe you loyalty as a result of some of the very, very horrendous actions that you have just recently taken out on me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Again, referenced this earlier about if it happens to be ongoing, repeated pattern, or just some offense that is just justified at all, then it's just time to sever ties, and I would say do so with a guilt-free conscience. So it's an interesting point though, because what is that action, whatever it is, XYZ, that the person has taken? Did they steal money? Did they steal your boyfriend or your girlfriend? Did they in some way try to physically take something from you that didn't belong to them?
Yeah.
Are they squatting in your apartment? Yeah.
They can squat there for a little bit, right? But then it gets
Yeah,
it gets to a point where it's like, all right, buddy, time to move on.
yeah.
I think the word, that the final takeaway here is guilt free, and I think that when when you sort of remove someone from your life permanently, you should be able to do it. There might be some temporary guilt, but ultimately you have to know yourself and be like, okay, I'm not feeling guilty about this. It's hurtful, it's painful, but I don't feel guilty about it. I can sleep well at night knowing I've removed this person from my life because they deserve it. Dallas, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Aaron, beautiful. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. This concludes the 43rd episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.